Yeah, on.
Two twins.
Yes. In a word, yes. I can finally say that now and have it be totally appropriate to the episode. So, yes.
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 Have you ever noticed, T, that my first word always when we intro the podcast is something in the affirmative? Usually
Yes.
some version of the word yes.
Yes. Patrick Ewing in the lane. Yes. John Starks for 3. Yes.
And today it's actually appropriate.
Alan Houston. Yes.
Marv has joined us today. So welcome to episode 36. Is that where we're at, T?
Yes. I mean, you asked for that one. I mean, come on.
Finally.
By the way, do people even know who? I mean, we're sitting here doing this, cracking ourselves up. Do people even know who Marv Albert is anymore? I mean, is he even like a thing? I don't even know if our audience will even understand this reference, but we don't care. We'll do it for 20 minutes anyway. Who cares?
Never stopped us before. Exactly. So
exactly. Yeah.
You know, when we set out to do Two Twins in an album, I don't know how it is for you, T, but like the flood of album choices just, it comes like a storm, right? It's just like, oh, I want to do this one, I want to do this one, I want to do this one. And, but certainly what you want to do is try and not be so overtly obvious about your favorite bands of all time, right? Because that's just too easy.
Yeah. Yeah.
But all along the way, as we've made many references to, tonight's band is, you know, there's a 1 and 1A for my favorite bands of all time. And tonight is one of the two.
It's time. Let's go.
I think it's time for sure. And you know, choosing the album was difficult. And we'll talk about that because we'll do a top 5 today. Because I think a top 5 Yes songs is, you know, an interesting exercise for sure. It's an exhausting exercise. But just choosing one album from this band is quite an ordeal. And when you think about the one we chose, does carry, you know, quite a bit of commercial appeal when you think about Yes's career. It's also the 11th album they released, but for many, they might think it's the first. And so last week we talked with Faith No More about a couple of things. We talked about that the band existed, you know, long before those might think, you know, Faith No More formed in 1979, but really they didn't break until 11 years later. For Yes, this band was well in existence by the time 90125 came out. But for many in the mainstream, this was their first experience with the group. So there's a couple of things to tackle with this album and in this band. One is the importance of personnel. And last week we talked about with Faith No More, when they lost Jim Martin, the band sort of was never the same afterwards. So we talked a little bit about the context of a loss after last week's album. Well, for today, we're going to talk about an important gain in personnel. And see, you know, I'm always fascinated by that. Band loses a member and then goes in a certain direction. Band gains a member and then goes in a certain direction. Is this, in your opinion, one of the more famous examples of the gain and then what came from it? Is there anything else that comes to mind in terms of personnel changes that maybe stand out quite as much as Faith No More last week and Yes this week?
Yeah, I mean, yes. So I think that with some of these prog groups from the 70s, you know, you reach a crossroad when you get to the 80s, right? And it's sort of like, how are we going to stay relevant? How are we going to tap into a new audience? Clearly, the 80s were the, you know, I mean, it was the Al Franken decade. It was a lot about indulgence, and it was about thinking about yourself, and it was about doing things to stay top of mind, relevant, and successful. And I think people were willing to kind of do whatever it took to make sure that you were still at the high end of some of those areas. The thing that's interesting, and I think Genesis is a very similar comp here, because, you know, you had a very artistic, progressive project through the 70s, and then you get to the 80s and it's kind of like, I'm not sure that this is something that's, this is either tired or stale, or the 80s generation of listeners isn't quite going to understand it the same way as the previous generation of listeners. And we got to do something different. So in a way, it's tapping into a new audience. In a way, it's also turning your band into a franchise, because you start to get this multi-decade era forming of your project, and a multifaceted and a multi-dimensional audience that you're now able to tap into. And you're really kind of building for the long game at this point as a band. If you're Wigwam, you said, well, screw it, we're just going to keep playing what we play. We don't care if we're on the radio. We don't care if our band turns into a franchise. And, yes. And I think the best comparison to that would be Genesis kind of said, we want to take to the next step. We want to reach this new audience. We want to turn this band into a franchise and play arenas and, be around for 40 years and all those type of things. And I think that, tonight's album was certainly how Yes reacted to that crossroads. For Genesis, it was probably Invisible Touch. You may have seen some shades in it on the self-titled record or on Duke, but I think that those two records are pretty comparable in taking a band that really wanted to remain topical, remain relevant, and this is what we got.
It's a nice connection to the second point, which is my long time fascination, as you well know, with bands that had 9 lives, or at least more than one life. And I don't mean like small personnel change or a minor change in sound. I mean legit different lives of the band. And Yes is certainly in that category. And what we'll look at with 90125 is one life of Yes, of many. But if you think about it, you mentioned a couple bands, Genesis, which is, the one and the 1A, that's the other one, right? So it's Yes and Genesis, as most of our listeners well know. But Genesis, multiple lives, Peter Gabriel thing, Phil Collins thing, totally different changes, totally different styles of sound. King Crimson, the beginning era, you've got the 80s thing, you've got the in-between, which we looked at in the episode looking at Red. Pink Floyd, great example.
Well, kind of. King Crimson never went all in mainstream. King Crimson never created an Invisible Touch or 90125. But to your point about lives, they certainly, in this weird way, staying true to what they were and never getting too big or too popular, certainly stood the test of time, to your point.
They definitely weren't mainstream, but the 80s Crimson doesn't sound a thing like In the Court of the Crimson King or Red. It's not even close. And Adrian Belew came in and just totally morphed the sound into something totally modern, right? Moody Blues, good example, different lives. And the one that's fascinating, you mentioned Rush. Rush didn't change personnel. It's one of the magical things about Rush, but they sure as hell had different lives. You know, 70s Rush, 80s Rush. By the 90s, they had turned into kind of this lean, mean rock band. And into the 2000s, they were almost flirting with like metal. Their albums were so heavy.
Right.
And so there's always a fascination with that. And I think that if you're going to get into music and be passionate about certain artists, it's fulfilling and it's never ending interesting to follow bands that had different lives. And so tonight we'll just look at one life of Yes. But let's look at our lives, T. What's going on in our lives? Because you mentioned the 80s is the Al Franken decade, but as we mentioned, the 2020s is the T decade.
Oh, no question. No question.
I think people really need to start thinking more about, how does this impact T?
Yeah, really, people need to start thinking less about themselves and more about how does this impact T? How does what I'm doing right now impact T? So yeah, I agree. It's going to be a great decade, buddy.
Let's see how Round and Round impacts T as we take the show round and round. All right, T, 3 albums that are spinning round for you.
Well, thanks, Nubs. I'll start off with a band that we've featured before, and that is the Beastie Boys. And I just wanted to check out Ill Communication a little bit this week, just to see how it feels. Still not as good as Check Your Head. Still probably wouldn't listen to it over Paul's Boutique just because Paul's Boutique's so interesting. But it's third in line. It's a great record by those guys and great instrumental stuff. And, they continued kind of, I think, the instrumentation piece and those type of things that they had started with Check Your Head. So it was a nice revisit. The second little something you might like and appreciate, Nub, and that's a little album called The name is Bootsy, baby.
Oh, I love that record.
Yeah.
Great call.
Yeah, that's by Bootsy Collins, who always made sure to be on the one, right? You got to be on the one.
One of my favorite YouTube clips of all time.
Ever. Well, that was a classic Nubs YouTube favorite, But great record. I mean, great. Obviously this was kind of his spin-off from the Parliament project, and he did a little solo thing, and it's great. It's a great listen. And it started to get a little warmer up here in Michigan, these last couple weeks. So Bootsy, and then my third choice, which is Fish, started to kind of come into the mix a little bit. Now, this is a live record called Alive One. I just, I have a lot of Fish recordings, pretty big fan, but I haven't heard anything that from a production sense or a execution sense captures the band this well. I mean, it's a perfect collection, not too many songs. A couple, they've got You Enjoy Myself and a couple of long pieces in there, nice, really amazing live version of Stash. But other than that, you get a nice variety of some of their shorter, more to the point tunes. But it's just a great sounding live record, really, really well done. And we got to see them on that tour back in 96 or 7, maybe, which was a good time had by all. So Fish is third on the list, and that's what's round and round for me. What is round and round for you, buddy?
Spring is on its way when T breaks out the Fish. All right.
Yes, sir. The sun is shining. Yeah.
That's a good sign. First for me is the second album by Periphery, which is called Periphery 2, but I think the full name is This Time It's Personal. It's a double album. Periphery is an outstanding prog metal band. Still have not seen the band live, but cannot wait to once the pandemic is over. And maybe we might go to a show again, T. Maybe. I don't know. Tough to say. Oh,
it's going to happen. It is going to happen. And I'm thinking about going to like even the most ridiculous, like if Yanni comes, I'm going. I'm there. Not that Yanni's ridiculous in any way, but like, Celine Dion, something like that, maybe Babs Streisand, shout out to Rupert Holmes. I might just go just because it's a show. Why not?
Exactly. I'm not going to be too discriminatory when it comes to that first show once it happens. So yeah, I've been digging Periphery. Demons and Wizards, the album by Uriah Heep. Recently picked up an 8-track version of that because
it's a great record. Great record.
It's absolutely fantastic. It really is. 1972. Just the opening track, The Wizard, and the overall sound of it. Mick Box's guitar. I love Demons and Wizards. To me, it's the best Uriah Heep album by far. But there's a lot of good stuff from Uriah Heep. That's a very underrated band. And third, a little jazz fusion for you. This is the band Passport, led by Klaus Doldinger, who longtime fusion guy, saxophone player, and he always performed under the name Passport. And they created a slew of albums. Second Passport, again from 1972. Really, really good stuff. Good instrumental jazz fusion and sort of cosmic music, if you will. So you're breaking out the Fish. I'm breaking out the fusion. Perhaps spring is on its way. So that is what is round and round for me. So T, let's dive a little further into 90125, including how on earth they came up with this album name, right? Because when I first heard of this album as a young lad, I was like, what's with that title? But actually, it's pretty simple where they got it from. So let's do that little dive into 90125 as we get into the nerdy deets done dirt cheap. You want some dirty deets? Yeah. You want some dirty deets? All right, 90125, which, just to answer the question up front, is actually the catalog number of the album on Atco Records. So not quite as creative as a name as one might think. It's simply just lifted the catalog number.
But it was actually 90124. I don't know if you caught that. I caught a little bit of that during the old research here for the old podcast, baby. It was 90124. And I believe that the number 5 is universally better represented because they knew this was going to be a global deal on the deal. And so they just bumped it up to 90125, and they thought it, flowed better and came across better universally. So,
all right. Well, there you go. There you go.
Don't say you didn't learn anything today.
Right? There you exactly. Hey, we don't call them nerdy deets for nothing, T. So
exactly.
November 7th, 1983, that was the release date. You and I were 3 years old, just little wees, if you will, little guys, little twerps. And it
still are kind of, right? I mean,
still are. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And the album went on to be Yes's most successful album commercially. We'll get to some of that, but the real key part of the album is the personnel, as we mentioned at the top. So John Anderson, who had left the band and was not part of the album Drama, returned to Yes really late in the game to sing on 90125. And from that, they decided to call it Yes. The band was originally going to be called Cinema. Even when Trevor Rabin joined, they were going to title it Cinema and kind of create a new band. But once John came back, he sort of came, begging back. It said, I love these songs. Can I sing on them? And then it was obvious that this was going to be a Yes album. But it was the arrival of Trevor Rabin, the South African musician, on guitars, keyboards, vocals, who really made 90125 happen. His voice, his guitar playing, his songwriting is all over this thing. We'll certainly get to that when we talk about the most famous song on the album, because it's really Trevor Rabin who made all of this happen. And Steve Howe, again, had left the band after the Drama album. So as Chris Squire and Alan White were trying to figure out how to press forward, they actually did some work with Jimmy Page in a group that was going to be called XYZ. But there was like management issues that didn't allow it to press on, which probably means they couldn't figure out the money, And so
this was the 80s, baby. It was all about the Benjis, right?
Exactly. So enter Trevor Rabin, who had already released a solo album, and Chris Squire, the only member that really was in Yes for every album and every tour as long as he was alive. He tragically passed away a few years back, but Chris Squire was always there if it was Yes, and he was here, of course, on bass and vocals. Alan White on drums. So, Alan White took over for Bill Bruford after Close to the Edge and was with the band the whole way and still with the band today. So Alan White is back there on the drums and percussion. And then one of the interesting underrated personnel aspects of 90125 is Tony Kaye rejoined the band on Hammond organ and piano. Tony Kaye is actually an original member of Yes. He was on the first 3 albums up through the Yes album. And then he was replaced with a guy named Rick Wakeman. So Yes kind of discovered that Wakeman was available. They sort of unceremoniously, let Tony Kaye go from the group. And Chris Squire said when they were putting together this new lineup, they thought that maybe Tony Kaye would be a good fit because of his use of more modern types of keyboards and things like that. So that's the lineup for 90125. But one of the key personnel that is not in the band is producer Trevor Horn. So Trevor Horn, obviously now has gone on to be one of the most famous and commercially successful album producers in the world. But at this time, he was simply a guy who was a member of the Buggles, who we all know by Video Killed the Radio Star. So Trevor Horn was part of that. But the other thing that you got to remember about Trevor Horn, he was a member of Yes. So on the album before 90125 Drama, Trevor Horn was the lead vocalist, and he sang on that album and he toured with the band. And, when John Anderson came back, obviously this new Yes came along and Trevor Horn was no longer going to be the singer, but they were on such good terms with him that they wanted to continue to work with him and have him produce this album. So T, I know you're fond of the Drama album, as I am as well. So it's kind of cool that Horn was just coming off of being the band's singer, but then also, stayed on to produce this album, and his production is vital to this record.
Really good. And yeah, Drama is a cool Yes record. It's an interlude, it's kind of a unique record in the middle of their career that, had a very different sound, very different personnel, but was still Yes. I mean, as long as Chris Squire was around, they were still going to be Yes because of his voice, his bass playing, the true backbone of the band. I mean, I love Chris Squire. But I guess they tried to have Horn do the vocals initially as part of the project. And some of these songs were just, these Trevor Rabin songs, were just too difficult, for him to sing. And clearly they decided that Rabin's vocals, Squire's vocals, and then of course, eventually John Anderson's vocals as he returned to the project were going to suit these songs the best.
For sure. So 90125, as we mentioned, was the band's most successful album to date. It went triple platinum in the United States. So that's sales of more than 3 million copies, which, nowadays it's like so unheard of, for an album to sell that many copies. But even at its time, triple platinum was considered incredibly successful. It achieved gold and platinum status in other countries, Canada, Germany, Argentina, the Netherlands. In the UK, it went gold, selling 100,000 units. So it was most successful in the US for sure. And charted very well, top 10 in a number of different markets and in countries around the world. It had 4 singles. The lead single was Owner of a Lonely Heart, also the lead track. This is a song that really made 90125 happen from a commercial standpoint. It turned the band into an arena band, which they never really were before. I mean, they had done really well touring, but this took them to a new stratosphere, allowed them to play larger venues and have, kind of a more modern production and some of the things that Yes would see throughout the 80s. Leave It was the second single. It Can Happen was released as a single in June of 1984. And the final single was Hold On, which was released in November of 84. So you look at kind of a year-long life for this band in terms of, singles. And it's almost as if, we're purposely doing this. But in the last episode that I hosted, the Flock of Seagulls episode, we talked about that their song DNA won the Grammy for Best Rock Instrumental Performance. Well, 90125 features the song Cinema, which, yes, won the Grammy Award for Best Rock Instrumental Performance. So how about that?
Did they give the Grammy back now, or did they keep the Grammy? I think they kept it, didn't they?
They kept it.
Yeah.
You bet. So
that is kind of amazing. So I think that wasn't Flock of Seagulls 1983 as well?
Yeah, one in 83.
You've done back-to-back 1983 records that both won Grammys because they didn't give the Grammy back now. They kept it for instrumental rock songs. How about that coincidence, eh?
It's as if we plan this stuff, which, trust me, we don't. So
no,
that's the 90125 story. T, I want to hear your story in terms of, your twin brother might have had a small role to play in this, but maybe not. But let's check out your wondrous story. And by the way, cue the yes on the wondrous stories. Right now, again, everything's coming together today because
right.
That's the yes that you hear singing about wondrous stories. So
right.
T, I cannot wait to hear your 90125 wondrous story. Let's kick it. T, what is your yes story?
Well, good job by you for, calling your own number here prior to my wonder story. I mean, that was pretty bold for you to say that I'm probably going to mention you, but you're right. You're right. When you're right, you're right. And you're always right. You were certainly into this band, and not because of 90125, but because of the kind of earlier work. And I didn't understand any of that, of course, because we've talked about many times on the old podcast here that you were listening to old geezer prog music. And I was like listening to Alice in Chains in the next room, like, what's with you, man?
I was, 12 trapped in a 40-year-old body, and now I'm 41 trapped in a 12-year-old mind. So it's like, it's gone full circle.
Sort of a 12-year-old body too, I would say, right? A little bit.
yeah, probably.
Yeah. No, but it's clearly one of those things that now not only do I completely understand, but I completely enjoy, and while I haven't tipped over and, fully into the sort of hardcore prog stuff that you still like, I mean, certainly digging into early Yes and early Genesis, has been a great thing, and certainly something you helped with. There are 2 things that really come to mind. The first was seeing the band on the Talk tour, which was just a treat because they had pretty much all members intact at that point. I think from the 90125 recording, right?
It was the exact lineup. Yeah. The only addition was Billy Sherwood, who would later become a full member of Yes, joined on stage for guitars and keyboards and stuff. But yeah, it was the 90125 lineup. It was awesome.
Yeah. And for some reason, so you and I haven't talked about this, but do you remember what probably the most energetic, memorable, people just got super freaking into it song of the night was? And it wasn't Owner of a Lonely Heart.
Yeah, no. So, I mean, that show was such a huge moment in my life. So you would think I would be able to.
I thought you were going to jump this in like 2 seconds.
So there were several memorable moments, but I remember City of Love being a pretty big jam that night. I remember
that one was pretty good.
Night was falling and it just sounded really good. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That one was pretty good, but that's not it.
Can you give me one more guess at it?
Sure.
And it was not Owner of a Lonely Heart. The Owner of a Lonely Heart never really pulled off live quite as well as the studio, you know? But I'm just going through the set list in my mind.
I'll give you a hint. It was the first song of the encore.
Roundabout?
So they came out, first song of the encore, because they played like 3 songs during the encore.
Yeah.
They came out and they played Hold On, and everybody went crazy, you know? And obviously it's a very up-tempo, kind of danceable, singable song. But it was so cool. It was like, oh my God, this of all songs just got people up and singing and like putting their fist in the air. I mean, it was great. It was really cool. It was like one of those unexpected. I mean, I knew that song was well liked, and obviously it's track 2 on tonight's album. But that one I remember that one just got sent everybody into a frenzy. It was awesome. And then the second thing, which I apologize, I'm probably stealing this one from you, but it's the advantage of being the co-pilot of the episode, I guess, right? The first officer of the episode. And that is the Laserdisc, right? What was it called? Yes Story?
Yes Years.
Yes Years. Okay. And this was a Laserdisc. And we were was this around like 13, 14 years old, probably? If I remember correctly, 12, 13, 14.
Younger than that, yeah, because it was documenting the Union tour, which was 1991.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, we were watching that, definitely in kind of 6th grade, heavy 7th grade. Yeah.
It's a great history of the band, took you from the beginning and through all the different lineups and through the Trevor Rabin edition. And then, to Nubs, to your point, it was really sort of documenting this Union tour, which brought back basically everyone who had ever been a member of the band. Yes. And they were playing songs from all the different eras, new, old, and in between. It was a really cool tour and a cool project. And boy, we watched this Laserdisc constantly. I mean, we've talked about A Year and a Half Life of Metallica and some of the other things that were sort of reoccurring watches for us. But the Yes Laserdisc, I mean, I don't even want to know how many times we probably got through that start to finish, but it was one that we really enjoyed. And it was fun because it was one of your favorite bands, but it really helped me kind of understand them more a little bit. And I really liked this later, era of Yes. And obviously it covers off on all that. But did help me even get into some of their early work as well. So those are the 2 things that come to mind for me when you talk about this wonderful band. So Nubs, I'll turn it back to you. This is going to be probably much more interesting than mine, but what's your wonder story with Yes?
I am glad you mentioned that show because that was the first time both of us saw the band. And I don't know if you've seen them since. I've probably seen the band, 10 times since then in a lot of different incarnations. Have you seen Yes since then?
I don't think so. No, I think that was the only time I saw them.
Yeah,
which would have been, I guess that was Talk Tour. So that would have been 94.
It was 94, June 25th, 1994. There's certain dates that live in infamy for me. So, so that was big seeing them live, but really rewind the tape back to when we were little munchkins and our mom had a pretty decent 45 collection with picture sleeves, and I remember the story about when you and I went into Mom's record collection and tore them up and threw them all over the room and everything.
They were just Frisbees, right? I mean, that's,
right. Yeah, exactly.
That's,
just Frisbees that came in these cool little sleeves. And so she had a pretty good 45 collection with picture sleeves. And one of the 45 she had was Owner of a Lonely Heart. And, you couldn't really go many places in 1983, 84 without hearing that song. And we were 3, 4, 5 years old and music was even important to us then. We loved listening to it and we were kind of curious about it. And so for me, that really was the beginning of just knowing there was a band called Yes. And obviously at 4 years old, we have no idea about their impact long before Owner of a Lonely Heart came out. But that song was something I really liked as a kid. It just had a nice groove to it, nice melody. It was very simple. And I remember the middle section. We'll get into it when we go track by track, but there's some things about the middle that were kind of cool when you were a kid. And so that was really the beginning. And a lot like Genesis, as we've talked about, it was sort of a record store thing. I'd always just explore the record shop like it was this heaven of stuff, and was fascinated by everything. And you go to the Yes section and you just notice there were like, all these albums and things that clearly came out back in the day. And so one day, very young, one of our early Repeat the Beat visits, I was like, I'm going to buy a Yes album today. And like most things in that era, it was all about curiosity. I wasn't able to go to Discogs and look at the different pressings, and I wasn't able to go to YouTube and listen to it or Amazon Music. I mean, you bought it because you were interested and because the cover art was cool. And so I bought Fragile. And what a perfect choice, because I could have bought anything, My first Genesis album I bought was And Then There Were Three. And again, cover art, name. And that was sort of a miss because it was, that's not a great entrance to the band. Fragile is like an ideal entrance to Yes. I mean, it's almost the perfect first album. And so, Roundabout, Heart of the Sunrise, a lot of the really famous songs on Fragile became instantly the most important songs in my life. And that just opened up the floodgates. So then you buy Close to the Edge and you figure out what's going on there. Oh my gosh, there's only 3 songs on it. And then Relayer, oh, there's only 3 songs on that, right? And so, like we talked about at the top of the show, just putting the pieces together of this band with all these lives and the endless kind of, curiosity of that being fulfilled. And it allows you to really dig deep into a band over time, right? You don't just discover the 3 albums they made in a week. You're literally buying these things and listening to them over the course of years. And that's just what this turned into. I was lucky enough to be alive and active in terms of music listening when the band was still around. So got to, when Talk came out, we were very much, it was very relevant at the time and got to see him on that tour. But then eventually Yes became kind of more a nostalgic thing, and you go see them in different lineups, and now they're playing albums, and John Anderson isn't even in the band anymore, but he's broken off and done a thing with Rabin and Wakeman. So you got like these 2 versions of Yes. So it's become a little ridiculous right now. But, at the time, I mean, this band was so incredibly important to me. It was important in terms of my development, in terms of playing music, listening to music. Huge band just for my ear, to know that there's other things out there that are different and unique. But I would say it all does come back to the Owner of a Lonely Heart 45, which makes tonight's album really relevant because it's not my favorite Yes album by any means, but it is the one that got a lot of people started in their Yes journey. So let's continue that journey as we dive into this record. Are you ready, T, for a little 90125?
Let's go, baby. 80s. I'm always down. Let's go.
All right. Well, hey, let's drop the needle, T. Do it. The beginning of 90125 starts with something that sounds a little bit like
that was pretty good. That was okay. Yeah, that was okay. Not an easy one to recreate verbally, but you did pretty good.
And there must have been a lot of listeners in 1983 that heard the first 2 seconds of this album and thought, what the hell did I buy? But then the trademark guitar riff comes in by Mr. Trevor Rabin of Owner of a Lonely Heart. And it all kicks in. So pretty catchy stuff, T. I mean, if I'm Echo Records and I'm thinking about what this new Yes is going to be like, and you hear this as the potential first single, you got to be feeling pretty good about the commercial appeal of this Rabin guy and what he's going to bring to the band. What are your thoughts on this really important song in the Yes history?
Well, is it fair to say that's so Rabin?
I think that's fair to say. I like it.
I mean, can we do that?
We can do that
one. Here's what's so Rabin about this one is that underneath guitar part, which actually is also the bridge. Really love how they use that. It's palm muted with a clean tone. It's played faintly underneath several different sections to kind of give it that ongoing flavor. It leads the breakdown and bridge, which is a fantastic part of the song. And then you build it back into a chorus. That's the part that I always listen for. That's the part that I love. I mean, the main riff is what it is, but if it weren't for that underneath guitar picking piece, this wouldn't be as good of a song. It's all Rabin, right? I mean, he brought this one in. You mentioned 9 lives. This band kind of almost had 9 lives during this actual recording. I mean, there were different iterations, different members, but the one thing that was certain, whether they were called Cinema, whether they were called Yes, whether they had John Anderson involved, whether they didn't, whoever was playing keyboards, one thing was certain was that Trevor Rabin was delivering. And these were songs that if he hadn't joined Cinema/Yes, he probably would have done as a solo project. And who knows how it would have sold, who knows how popular it would have been. But I think the band collectively was very smart in saying, this is good material. Let's try and use it to our benefit as the Yes franchise. Rabin was smart in saying, these are good songs and I probably could get them out to more people with a band that isn't made up of studio musicians or whatever, because he was no drummer. And there were a lot of smart decisions made here. And I think it culminated with Owner of a Lonely Heart as the opening track, as a huge monster hit and a song that'll probably live on forever.
It's certainly a pop song, but I think the magic is in the bridge. When it breaks down to that Rabin riff, that do, 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 do. I mean, very cool picking there. And then that kind of, I mentioned it earlier, but that da, boom, 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 boom. It's like it's almost like dancey, you know what I mean? And who would have ever equated that with Yes? But there was a 12-inch remix of this song, and after Close to the Edge and Relayer came out, would you have ever guessed that band would eventually have a 12-inch remix of any song?
Yeah, well, and you mentioned Trevor Horn. He deserves a lot of the credit for this, and obviously he was a forward thinker as a musician and as a producer, most importantly, obviously, to this. And I think a lot of those things probably have his fingerprints on them. And it was very creative and very timely and relevant to the sound at the time. And they used it in a good way.
So if you ask most mainstream listeners out there, what's your top 5 Yes songs? Owner of a Lonely Heart would probably be number 1 on a lot of it. It'd be that or Roundabout, because really those are the 2 hits from the band. But I want to know your top 5 Yes songs. It's like, looking at an entire universe of a catalog and trying to find these very select needles in the haystack, right? So
yeah,
I'm interested in that. So, let's go 5-1. And if it's not numbered perfectly, that's totally fine. But let's just kind of go back and forth and compare notes here and see, because which life, do your favorite Yes songs come from? And I have a feeling I might know yours, but that's why you do this exercise,
So we're going in order then, 5-1.
Well, do your best. It's not doesn't have to be perfect.
No, that's fine. I mean, listen, cracking the top 5 first, and this is just, there's no question this is in there, is 5% for nothing. I mean, is that a good yes joke?
Great yes joke.
Pretty good yes joke? Okay, good. So what do we used to call that? The messy song?
The sloppy Bruford song.
Sloppy something. It's like 35 seconds of just great sloppy prog noise. It's great.
Fragile, as great of an album as it is, they had this brilliant idea for each of them to have a track where they could do whatever they wanted, and all 5 of them are disasters. It's just like, what?
It's true. It's true. No, my first one would be Perpetual Change, which is the closer of the Yes album, and that's a bit of a journey. I think Yes's music, whenever I think of it, I always think journey. They're kind of taking you somewhere and then probably pulling you back home at the end, almost like going on a ride at the fun park. Perpetual Change, I just love the dynamics. I love the sort of sweepy nature of it. And it would be a top 5 Yes tune for me. What do you got, Nub?
That's a fabulous choice. Love it. And my number 5, so you talk about the 9 lives of Yes. Mine comes from one of the later lives. So this is a nerdy choice, but it's also an amazing song. It's Homeworld, The Ladder. It's the opener off The Ladder, which is the 1999 album. And it's a long epic. It's about 11 minutes long, I think, and just goes through some beautiful movements, and the outro is really powerful. And, I was 19 when this album came out and got to see a couple different shows on the latter tour. And it's an awesome opening track. It's one that if people are not familiar with, they should check it out because it's a pretty, outstanding musical movement from Yes. It's one of those good long pieces that they do.
Nice.
That's number 5. What do you got for 4?
Going for the one, kind of a more sort of, I liked when they got kind of straightforward and punchy. There was nothing too ambitious about it. It was just kind of a nice, rock pop type track of the time, but love that one off of the album
Going for the One.
Yeah. So that would be 4th on my list. What do you got next?
I've got South Side of the Sky off Fragile. The piano break that Wakeman does is just legendary. And it's a very emotional song, got a thick groove. I love the Bill Bruford era of Yes. Alan White's great and all, but there was something just about Bruford and the way that he played that was such a signature part of the band's sound. And he's really carrying the groove there. And again, a little bit of a longer piece, kind of the underrated song on Fragile. Roundabout gets a lot of attention, but I love South Side of the Sky.
You mentioned Bruford. One of the things we got to throw out there is on the Yes Laserdisc, we always got a giggle out of watching Bill Bruford play like the 1980s electronic pads because he sort of took on that role. Because obviously, the reunion was bringing back pretty much anyone who had ever been in the band. And so Alan White was playing the acoustic drums, if you will, and Bruford kind of was doing all this stuff on these electric pads. And it's so funny to see this guy who is like such a staple of 70s progressive drumming to be up there like, knocking around on all these like electronic, black 1980s drum pads. It always kind of cracked us up. But yeah, great drummer. I mean, the guy's fantastic.
What's your number 3, T?
I've got And You and I. It's hard to, Close to the Edge to me is almost like just one big giant song. So it's kind of hard to sometimes parse that apart, and it's hard to pick which one you want to go with off of that one. But, you talk about a journey. Close to the Edge is just such a special record, but I really love And You and I. You could easily go with Close to the Edge as well. Siberian Khatru is amazing too. So it's like, it's hard to pick the 3, but I think I'm going with And You and I as sort of anybody who's remotely interested in musicianship needs to listen to Close to the Edge early and often. So what's next for you?
It's an awesome choice. Always one of the high points of a Yes show for sure. Number 3 for me is The Calling, the opening track off Talk. Should have been a big hit for the band. I know one of the famous stories about The Calling is that David Letterman loved it. He heard it on the radio and he said, "Who is this?" And when he found out it was Yes, he immediately had them come in and play the song on the show. But it never really took off. They had all sorts of problems with the label during the Talk release and the tour. That is still one of my favorite Yes albums. I love the Talk album, and it's the opening track. And I think it's one of the strongest songs the band ever did. It's very Rabin, but you got some good stuff from Alan White on drums and Tony Kaye on some keyboard work. It's to me one of the most cohesive songs from the band on the Talk album. So yeah, I love The Calling. That's number 3 for me. All right, we got 2 more. T, what is your numeral dos?
I'll stick with Talk and I'll go with the track following, and it's I Am Waiting. It's one that I've always loved, and I like the Talk record too. I think there's some really cool stuff on there. The Endless Dream piece at the end is really nice. We got to see that live, which was cool as well. But I Am Waiting is a gorgeous song and one that kind of goes through these different dynamics. It's a beautiful guitar, really, really gorgeous. I love that song. Always have. What's next for you?
I love I Am Waiting. I love that choice, man. That would probably be my number 6 if I needed to expand this thing. So I'm glad you chose that one. Number 2 for me is Shoot High, Aim Low off of Big Generator. It's a real Yes fan kind of favorite. If you listen to podcasts of Yes fans and real nerdy Yes stuff, as I listen to frequently, this is certainly a fan favorite. Big Generator is not an album that you go to a whole lot. It's got some real high points, but you could tell the band wasn't particularly working well together during that phase. But Shoot High, Aim Low, just everything comes together. It's got atmosphere. It's understated, but then it's got this huge explosion kind of in the middle and at the end. And it's really, really good. Rabin takes over the lead vocal and his voice is just dynamic at this point, so that's my number 2. All right, T, our number 1s. What do you got at the top of the list?
I've got to go with Starship Trooper. It's brilliant. 3 parts, a wonderful 70s trilogy, and Worm has always been one of my just favorite pieces of music of all time. You know, if you were to actually not necessarily worry about full songs but just, you know, if you were to kind of look at sections and look at just pieces, even within full songs, I mean, that closing of Worm is just spectacular. And that's Steve Howe, you know, that sort of came up with that and obviously plays the lead part over it. But, you know, you talked during the Kid A episode about how everybody has like that thing they play when they get the instrument in their hand. You know, it's sort of that go-to, almost like a warm-up type thing. And, you know, within the first minute of holding a guitar, I'm playing Worm. You know, it's a C chord where you're kind of adding the 3 up and down the neck. It just makes it fun to play, but man, it's beautiful. It's just an awesome thing. And I love what leads up to it as well. You know, those first 2 sections of Starship Trooper are great. And the way it kicks into Worm is fantastic. So, I mean, I think it's their peak, and I think it's just a brilliant piece of music by these guys, and one of the better rock long form ish tunes ever, and one of the best rock trilogy tunes ever. And I just love it. So Nubs, what is at the top of your list? I'm interested in this one.
I just want to give you kudos for your top 5. I mean, you spanned 3 decades, a ton of different albums, and how many different sounds and how many different members. So that's a good top 5 in terms of all the ground that it covers. So my number 1 is Heart of the Sunrise. Just a perfect song. Absolutely perfect. And probably the single most emotionally driven piece of music I've ever heard in the rock world. You know, just the epic nature of it, the way it slows down at the end. And it's got catchiness in a really unique way, but more than anything, it's just incredibly dramatic. You know, it's got that kind of cinematic thing going on that Yes was able to do. And it defines progressive rock, in my opinion. I mean, if an alien came from outer space and said, hey, what's this prog thing? Number 1, I'd say, what's wrong with you? That's your question? Like, that's what you want to know? But then I would say, here, listen to Heart of the Sunrise by Yes, because it's quintessentially prog in every single way. And I still love it. And I listened to it, you know, how many thousands of times have I listened to this song in my life, and it never gets old. I mean, it just truly never gets old.
That's great. It's an incredible song.
All right, see, solid top 5 work. Love it. So Owner of a Lonely Heart, not on our top 5s. And I have to say, I'm surprised this next track was not on yours, because I believe you've always kind of been pretty, I think you've always liked it. And you mentioned it earlier as a high point of the live show that you saw. So let's go to track 2, Hold On. I thought that was one of your favorites. See, correct me if I am wrong, but I thought you've always been pretty fond of Hold On.
I like Hold On. There are other tracks on this one that I like better, but it does certainly make me think of that live show during the Wondrous Story. And I mean, you could just tell people really were happy to hear this one. And, you know, they had gotten the crowd kind of charged up, but it's a great track too. You know, it's I mean, listen, this record is on a mission, right? This record is on a mission to be digestible, to be commercial. And it's got, you know, some great grooves and some great licks and some great hooks, and Hold On kind of covers all those. It's a nice track too for this one, certainly.
But then you get to that middle section again, and it's this offbeat kind of acapella thing with some keyboards in the background. I used to adore listening to the middle section. I would listen to this song all the time just to get to that middle, that Talk the Simple Smile thing. I just thought it was so clever, so creative. All right, T, let's get, you know, you can't be prog without getting a little sitar in there every once in a while, right?
A little electronic sitar.
Yeah, a little fake sitar. Nothing says 80s prog like fake sitar. And that's what you get with It Can Happen. You finally get kind of the familiar vocal style of Yes, the Anderson, Squire, and Rabin only adds to it, but you can really hear Squire's background vocals on this song. And it's a lot of John Anderson being John Anderson. You know, it's like what people like about Anderson really shines through, I think, on It Can Happen.
Yeah, I mean, Squire's vocals are so freaking important to this band, you know, and I don't know how many people beyond hardcore Yes fans realize that. But, Squire's vocals blend great with Rabin. They blend great with John. They were great on their own on Fish Out of Water. I mean, he's a great vocalist. And obviously we know, I just think of him playing that Rickenbacker, we know the kind of bass player he is, and he has a great little bass lick that we just heard underneath the fake sitar, which I think really adds to that sort of second layer of the verses. But I like It Can Happen. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Squire was primarily responsible for kind of the composition of this one, I think.
It's very Chris Squire. I mean, it was a group effort, but without question, his voice is the loudest in terms of the music on this one, no doubt.
Yeah. I love this song. I think it's a really great way to kind of pull back a little bit for track 3. All these songs could have been hits. There's no shortage of hooks and hits here, but I love the sitar piece and the drum hits and then the bass lick that Squire brings in. I think It Can Happen's really good. Big fan.
From fake sitar, we go to fake xylophone and a little do 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 with changes. Well, Maestro, I don't think you chose that clip by accident. Well done, as always. Why don't you talk about your thoughts on changes?
That middle section's amazing. God, it's so good. I mean, Rabin's voice is just... Rabin was a pro, man. I mean, he was a pro. He was a great player, a great songwriter, a great singer. He even wore eyeliner on stage. I mean, come on. Like, not the only other guy that pulled that off was Nigel Tufnell. So I'm a big Rabin guy, and Changes is very, very much Trevor Rabin. Now, the whole lead-in part is cool. I used to hate it when I was little. I was like, what? This is frantic and weird. But I don't know how many people catch it, but during the last third of that sort of chaotic intro, you're hearing the main lick and it's buried, but you realize that, oh, they're doing something here. This is on time. This is not some goofy, mixed time signature thing just for the sake of it. So, if you haven't heard that, listen for it next time, because you can hear the main 4/4 lick being played underneath this frantic intro, and it's really cool. And it all comes in on time, and it's just awesome. Changes is a masterpiece, I think, of 80s pop rock, and it's a phenomenal chorus that jams without overcooking it. The middle section we just played is outstanding. I like the way it closes. It's got 2 parts. I mean, what's there not to love about Changes, Nub?
I think it was the band saying, maybe not consciously, but we're still a prog rock band and we can still do the things that we used to do. I mean, it's 6 minutes long, but it doesn't feel like that at all. And you called it a pop song. I call it a prog song. You know what? We're both right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, it kind of marries those two ideas perfectly. And again, Rabin's so important. Not only did he bring On Over Lonely Heart to the band and deliver them their first top hit, but a song like Changes is something that he also showed his own chops. This was not just a guy who could write pop songs. He also could fit into Yes really flawlessly in terms of that prog idea, and Changes really is the idea of that. And it continues. If you flip the record over to side 2, because by the way, T, how about that side 1?
Yeah.
On Over Lonely Heart through Changes.
Yeah.
I don't know if it gets a whole lot better.
That's pretty sick. Yeah.
So flip it over and you got your Grammy winner, which is the 2 minutes and 7 seconds known as Cinema. Oh, tease. I want to hear the end of that. So with Changes, they created 6 minutes that felt like 3 minutes. With Cinema, they created 2 minutes that felt like 10 minutes. It's just, you can't believe how much they squeezed into this really short
That's well
song.
said. That's well said. It really does feel longer than 2 minutes. And you win a Grammy, you did something right, I guess.
Perfect lead into, again, the second single off the album. And again, I would say maybe should have been bigger hit just because of its complete overt commercialism. And I mean that as a compliment in this case. And that is Leave It. First getting into Yes, I got to tell you, I didn't care much about Leave It. It was usually just a way to get to, one of my favorite songs later in the album. This song has aged tremendously well for me.
Well, I think I was excited to talk about Leave It because I was going to say exactly what you just said as far as how it's aged. And here's why. We've talked on the old podcast here about your favorite genre of music, festival rock, right?
Yes, we have. Yes.
Okay. Now listen, if you turn on, I'll just say Alt Nation on Sirius, because I think that's like the ultimate festival rock station. This is what you're hearing. I mean, this holds up so well. Now, I don't think they intended to be, professorial about what music was going to come in the 2015s, 2020s. But I'll tell you what, you could put this on Alt Nation right now and it'd be a hit. People would be like, what is that? Who is that? That's a cool, hip, fresh sound. Probably made in some DIY studio, some, trio in San Francisco or something. No, this is 1983. Yes, it holds up really well. And it's like, I almost would venture to say that Leave It by Yes might be the first festival rock song. Nubs, what do you think of that take?
I love the take. For the birthplace of festival rock. Who would have thought it came from Yes?
See, now you're going to like it. You're going to start liking festival rock now.
Hey, if it sounded like this, I would like it. But this song has just, it's gotten better and better with every few years. I think a big shout out has to go to Alan White for his electronic drums performance. I mean, the groove on this is so deep. And, again, another dance floor song. There was a 12-inch remix of this as well that I think did pretty well. But Leave It's kind of got the whole package, but it doesn't sound like anything Yes ever did aside from it. But this song is just, I don't know, it's a special part of the Yes catalog for sure. All right, on to maybe the only dufferoo on the album, if you will, and that is Our Song. Really sounds like something off Drama. And I love Drama, but it I don't know. It's the only song that kind of sounds like it doesn't belong on this album, doesn't it?
Yeah, you kind of got I always get the feeling when I hear this that they were going for something old school, Yes, but then couldn't quite get it there because they were getting pulled probably by Horn in the direction of saying, we got to make sure that this fits with the rest of the album. And we got to make sure that this doesn't venture too far away musically or production wise. It's not awful. But it's going 9 for 9, which they've pretty much done to this point. I mean, what the hell? I think they're allowed one pass, which Our Song kind of is. It's not awful, but it's, pretty high bar too when you look at the remaining 8 tracks.
I think that's a big part of it. It doesn't quite measure up to the rest of the album. And Dufferoo might even be a little heavy, but regardless, it's certainly the song that was the least impressive on this album. And you sure as hell will not say that about track 8, which is City of Love. Boy, if you could see the air instruments that are being played over here, guys.
Yeah, exactly. It's pretty obnoxious, I must say. The way we were, I think I was going from drum to guitar and you were drumming and I don't know what, you play some keyboards. I don't know what the hell else we were doing.
I have to hit the guitar every time I hear that section of the song.
Yeah.
This was one of those hand-delivered Trevor Rabin compositions, kind of a finished deal. And you can hear it. It's a very complete song. Again, kind of like what we mentioned with Leave It, maybe should have been bigger hit. I don't know. It was never a single, but it is a crowd favorite at Yes shows when they're performing in this orientation.
Killer song. I love the duality of this kind of punchy verse with the, and Squire's really walking it through with that bass part. I guess you got to give the kick drum a little credit there too. And then into this very, catchy commercial type chorus. And it sort of takes you back and forth. And then obviously you have, we just played a couple of fairly complicated, timing licks, combining guitar and bass and keys and all those things together. And it's a great song. Really, really. I always kind of think of City of Love and the song that follows as sort of the, almost like it could be a long form in a way. I mean, they're two different songs, but they close up. You can't listen to one without listening to the other, because I think they both just help you close this one up so nicely. So yeah, City of Love's great.
Definitely a top 10 song for me, T, and almost cracked the top 5. It's on the list and really almost made it. I've always loved the chorus of it. I just think it's one of those really rock solid choruses. You could build anything around that chorus and make a delightful song. All right, the last track, Hearts. This is like kind of the epic. This is the only track on 90125 that crosses the 7-minute mark. And let's see how 90125 ends. Here's Hearts. Good work again, Maestro. You nailed the pinnacle of the song. It kind of builds towards that. Like the whole first couple minutes, you're just thinking, gosh, I hope this opens up into this melody being really heavy. And it does. It kind of does exactly what you want the song to do and builds up to this great outro.
Yeah, I mean, this probably would crack the top 5. We did decide in advance that we were going to not include any 90125 songs in the top 5, but if we were, this probably would be in it. It's a brilliant way to close this. And I love the way it takes its time. I do think that I'm sure Trevor Horn didn't necessarily want a song past 7 minutes, but this really works. And it's modern prog, which I think most of this album really is. And, sort of set a tone for how you can take a core sound and turn it into a modern sound, which I think is the beauty of 90125. And I think Hearts is the pinnacle of that. It's a fantastic closer. I wish I could be more critical of these 9 tracks than I have been, but it's very difficult to do. And I love the way it closes out.
See, let's do a little assessment here. And I want to know what you think. Does 90125 matter in the grand scheme of things? What do you think?
Well, I think for those that really dug into it, it does, because, you're taking a band that was at a crossroads, and you're taking a band that had to figure out whether it was personnel, whether it was instrumentation, whether it was songwriting, how to maintain relevancy heading into a time period in 1983 where that wasn't easy. There was a lot of competition out there. You had rock coming into play from a sort of hair metal standpoint. Still a lot of classic rock bands that were really popular on radio. And, if you were kind of one of these prog groups, you kind of had to say, what are we going to do to not venture too far away from being ourselves, but to make sure that we're moving forward. And adding Trevor Rabin was a big step. And modernizing their sound was a big step. And the thing I love about 90125 is it fits into, I'll use the word you keep using on these episodes, of canon. It fits into the Yes canon really nicely. It doesn't sound not like Yes. Okay. Now, some of their stuff after this got a little bit sort of ventured out a little bit to where it wasn't fully true to kind of what they are and always have been. The thing I love about 90125 is it's definitively Yes, but it's a modern turn and a modern sort of evolution of the group, which I think they did in a very healthy way. It's not too long. It's efficient. As indulgent as the 80s were, I think they kept this tight. They were very thoughtful, and I give Trevor Horn a lot of credit on this as well, in putting together something that Yes fans could appreciate, even those that went further back, but also new fans could appreciate. And I guarantee you this album got a lot more people into Close to the Edge and into the Yes album and into some of those more classic elements. And obviously they were able to go forward and establish a truly multi-decade career, which is difficult for any band to do. That's my take. What do you think, Nub? Did 90125 matter?
Yes, it mattered. It's the ultimate
yes.
It's the ultimate gateway drug to prog rock and to the Yes catalog, simply put. And without this album, Yes probably dies a very slow death, maybe even a very quick death, because there was really no future for the band at this time. I think it says something about these guys, just as people and artists, that they were able to take in this new member, bring back Tony Kaye, and create an album that sounds like it's a band that's been together forever. You know, there's such a cohesiveness on this album. It doesn't sound like a Trevor Rabin solo album or Yes with a new guy. It just sounds like a modern version of Yes. And I think you nailed that perfectly. But very, very simply put, T, without 90125, Yes is gone. And that wouldn't be a good thing for anybody. Most notably, I would have missed out on many years of being a complete nerd if this album had not come out and given me some prog fuel to get me through the last, 41 years. So, all right, T, final analysis. Let's do the final cut. Is 90125 on the turntable? Is it in the collection? Is it collecting dust? Or is it going in the dreaded for sale bin? T, what's your final cut?
Well, for anyone that's actually been listening, this probably won't be a big surprise, but I am putting it on the turntable because I think it's one of the best records of the 80s, certainly the front half of the decade. I think it was extremely thoughtful in making sure that you kept the roots of this band while also modernizing this band. It's Trevor Rabin at his best. He did some great work with Yes in the couple albums that followed, but top to bottom, this is his best work, and I'm a huge fan, and I think he's just an incredible talent. And you put all those things together and you got 90125, and for me, it's on the turntable. How about for you, Nub?
We'll need 2 copies, T, because it's on the turntable for me as well. It sounds as fresh as ever. It has held up extremely well. Owner of a Lonely Heart, it was a little overdone. Do I need to hear that song many more times? Probably not, but it's not about that. It's about the rest of the album. It's about the other 8 songs in the way that they comprise just this new and unique sound that Yes found. And again, if you're into Yes, the beauty is you get to hear a lot of different things, and 90215 stands out as that. So it's an album I continue to listen to top to bottom regularly. So it is on the turntable for me. All right, T. So let's close up shop here and let's check in with old Dolores here and let's see what is in your head. All right, T, 3 songs that you cannot get out of your head right now.
The first is by the Yellow Magic Orchestra, an early pioneer, innovator of electronic music. It's Rydeen. The second is by Ecstasy. It's Senses Working Overtime, one of their best. And the third, a little something different, is the Foo Fighters, Bridges Burning, which is one of my favorites from those guys. Track 1 on their great album, Wasting Light. Nubs, what's in your head, buddy?
I've got Spitting Games by Snow Patrol. This is off my favorite Snow Patrol album, Final Straw. It's an album I'd love to do at some point on the podcast. Next, I've got a rather obscure song from a band we both love, Sensefield, and that is Different Times. This is off the Building album, so long before they polished up their sound when they were a little bit more of an emo group. Different Times is a really killer song. And then lastly, maybe a surprise to you, a song that I really like from last decade, and that is Lifehouse, Hanging by a Moment. I've always liked that song. It is not a band that I'm super into or anything like that, but and again, I kind of revisited that song. It's like, oh, this song's actually pretty good. So
are they Christian rock, Lifehouse? Christian rock?
I think they're in that ambiguous Faith Plus One sort of area.
Yeah, they have the Creed thing. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. T, we explored 90125. We came, we saw, we conquered. We both put it on the turntable. Loved hearing your insight. Loved your top 5 Yes songs. And let's hope that a new generation of fans can discover this album and all the good things that Yes have done for music. What do you think?
I agree, buddy. Nice pick. Thanks.
You got it. I want everybody to follow us on our social media outlets. Leave us some feedback. Make a request. We got a request episode coming up here in a couple of weeks. So we are always looking to fulfill your requests. Please take care of yourselves and take care of each other. And we will see you for episode 37 of Two Twins and an Album.
Two Twins. An album. Well, that's about it. That's all we have. I hope it wasn't too disappointing. We will see you on tour. Until then, take it easy.